Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Samantha Hunter, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the Fall 2021 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I'm now pleased to present the session covering the role of the NSF Directorate for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. This session will be presented by Dr. Rebecca Farrell, a Program Officer in the Division of Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences. Take it away.
I'm really pleased to be presenting today for the NSF Grants Conference for Fall 2021. My name is Rebecca Farrell. I'm a Program Director in the Directorate for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences within the Division of Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences. I'm one of the Program Directors for the Biological Anthropology Program. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to be presenting about a few things related to NSF. I'm going to start with a little bit of background about NSF as a federal agency, a little bit of context there, and then I'm going to move on to talking specifically about SBE directorate opportunities and some of the funding mechanisms that SBE uses. And then I'll talk for a few slides about the submission process and some additional tips about writing proposals. Next slide. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Science Foundation, we are a federal agency. The agency was created in 1950, right after World War II. And the goal of the agency is quite broad. It's to advance fundamental science. So if you look at the mission statement, it is to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense. And so it's a little bit different from some of the other federal agencies that you might be familiar with. For example, the National Institutes of Health is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. NSF is not part of a department, that's why we're called an independent agency. And our mission is very broad, so we are not focused on a particular thing like public health or defense. We are focused on science and advancing good science in all areas. Next slide. Here we have a recent grouping of information about NSF by the numbers, and I'm just going to go through these to give you a little bit more information about each one. 94% is indicating the percentage of NSF's budget, which is now around $8 billion a year. 94% goes toward research, education, and related activities, meaning that our overhead is fairly low. We see the figure of $8.5 billion for the fiscal year 2021 enacted budget. On average, we're getting around 43,000 proposals that we evaluate each year. Those are coming in from somewhere around 2,000 institutions that end up being funded, and a much broader group that are putting in proposals. And of those 43,000 or so proposals that are evaluated, we're making around 12,000 awards per year. So it's a lot of proposals that are being processed through NSF each year. We're supporting somewhere around 300,000 individuals, and some of our funding is allocated to specifically to STEM education. That's that figure of 1.4 billion. We do support public and private partnerships and small businesses, and we do have a lot of research outcomes that were supported at some point along the way by NSF that have resulted in Nobel Prize winning research. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, NSF is funding research across all fields of science and engineering. And in this slide, you can see the breakdown of NSF by different research directorates and an additional couple of offices, and I'll just go through quickly. So we have the Biological Sciences Directorate, we have Engineering, Math and Physical Science, Computer Information Science and Engineering, the Geosciences, which also includes the Office of Polar Programs, the Education and Human Resources Directorate, the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate, which I'll be talking more about, and then two additional offices, the Office of Integrative Activities and the Office of International Science and Engineering. And those, based on their titles, are cross-cutting in nature. So we interact with those on a regular basis. I'll also note that around 25% of all federally funded academic fundamental research at US colleges and universities is supported by NSF. And for SBE, for the social, behavioral, and economic sciences, that percentage is a good bit higher, somewhere over 50%. Next slide. So moving on to talking specifically about SBE, social, behavioral, and economic sciences. This is the directorate at NSF that is focused on humans, human behavior at an individual scale, at a societal scale, and thinking about the way that human behavior interacts with other processes in the world, environmental processes, scientific processes. So what's important to keep in mind is that this type of research is systematic research. It is fundamental research focused on humans. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, and I don't think I'm going to go through every single program that's listed here because I encourage you to go to the link that's noted at the bottom of this slide where you can scroll through and browse through the programs yourself. But I want to show that there are different divisions within the Directorate of Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, divided into Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences, which is my division, the Social and Economic Sciences, and the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. In addition, we have an Office of Multidisciplinary Activities with a number of cross-cutting initiatives at the directorate and cross-directorate levels. I want to make a note that if you're interested in knowing more about the trends and statistics related to science and science education in our country, NCSES is the website where you would like to look. A lot of really interesting reports focusing in on those trends. Next slide, please. So you probably didn't have time to look through all of those program names, but in the multidisciplinary activities box, one of the programs that I want to highlight is Build and Broaden 2.0. This is a relatively new program. It had its first round this past fiscal year that is interested in supporting the research of scholars at minority-serving institutions. And I've included some of the details here. The image at the top is showing that we're interested in building research capacity, in fostering research partnerships, and in broadening opportunities for minority-serving institution scholars. So I encourage all of you, if you're interested and if this is something that would apply to your particular research program, to look further into the Build and Broaden program. We're excited to be moving forward with this in SBE for the coming year. Next slide. Some additional opportunities that are cross-directorate, meaning that it's not just SBE, but SBE and other parts of NSF. I wanted to highlight the first one here in bold, which is the mid-career advancement opportunity. This is also a relatively new program with just 1 year under its belt. And the goal here is to support researchers who are at the associate professor level who may have had a slowing down in their research program because of all of the other responsibilities and activities that they may be involved with at the associate professor level, and for associate professors who are interested in branching out into a new skill set or making new connections with a new network of researchers. And so you can, probably the easiest way to find it is to just Google mid-career advancement and NSF, and you will see the solicitation. Additional programs that may be of interest, one that I think is very interesting, Ethical and Responsible Research, or ER2. This is another cross-directorate initiative, but important to keep in mind that SBE plays a big role in that program because it's humans and the behavior and interactions of humans that raise ethical questions and questions about responsible research in science. SBE also has a number of cross-directorate partnerships with the Computer Science Directorate, such as cyber learning and the integrative strategies for understanding neural and cognitive systems. And I won't go through all of the additional opportunities because, again, you can go to the SBE webpage and browse through the different opportunities. Next slide. Now, this is a little bit different. This is not about specific SBE topical opportunities. What I'm going to talk about now are the types of mechanisms for funding that you may see as you're browsing through the different opportunities at NSF. So unsolicited competitions may be what you're most familiar with. This is where you would be looking at a core program announcement or a core program at NSF and trying to determine whether your research is a good fit for that program. You would be looking to see what the next deadlines are and perhaps reaching out to a program officer to talk about your research and whether it's within scope of that program. Those are unsolicited proposals where you have a research idea, you're interested in submitting it for consideration for funding at NSF. There are also special solicitations that are not core programs. So for example, the Build and Broaden 2.0 program that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. And these will have a particular solicitation describing that program, probably will indicate how much funding is allocated, planning to be allocated toward that program. It will talk about deadlines, and it will talk about additional requirements or rules or limitations on eligibility and all of those other details that may be specific to that particular special program. Next slide, please. The rapid mechanism is something that NSF realized many years ago may be needed in cases where there are data that are ephemeral in nature, meaning that if you were to wait until the next regular review cycle of a regular core program at NSF, you may be missing out on the ability or opportunity to collect those data. And so these are limited amount of money and a limited time scope, so $200,000 maximum and 1 year maximum. It's a shorter proposal, it's a 5-page description, and probably one of the biggest differences is that this is reviewed internally at the program level. Because it's reviewed internally at the program level, you have to ask a program officer first before you submit a rapid proposal. It would not be appropriate to send in a rapid proposal without the program officer knowing that it was coming. So that gives us a chance as program officers to talk with PIs about whether a rapid is an appropriate mechanism for the project. And sometimes it is, and sometimes the answer is that no, we think you could probably go ahead and submit to the next cycle of a regular program. Next slide. Another of these alternative mechanisms that you can read about in the grants guide for NSF is the EAGR, the Early Concept Grants for Exploratory Research. So this is really for research questions that you may have where you may not believe that it's ready for a full review in a core program panel. Something about it is high risk. You may not have as much pilot data as you would for a standard core program. It's exploratory in nature. Maybe it's something that's really paradigm shifting where a panel is going to just really react because it's so different from what they're used to seeing. So in those cases, we're looking at a $300,000 maximum and a 2-year maximum. You have a few more pages than the rapid. You have 8 pages for the description. And again, internal review only and contacting the program officer first. These are not, these mechanisms, rapid and EAGR, are not used in the same way across all of the foundation. And what I mean by that is that there are some programs who are more willing to consider EAGRs and rapids on a regular basis than others. And that comes down to the fact that it is internal review only and that the majority of what we do at NSF is reviewed through the peer review system and external review. Next slide. Another program that you may be familiar with and that is used across the foundation is the career program. So this is a particular mechanism for early faculty career development. The eligibility requirements are that you are untenured faculty, but either tenure track or something comparable to tenure track. That you are a single PI, you're not going to have a bunch of co-PIs, though you may have letters of collaboration and other individuals that you'll be collaborating with. At least $400,000 that you're requesting, and a 5-year minimum award. So these are really intended to allow an early faculty researcher to talk about their research program, not only in terms of what it is they're going to do next, but a little bit of a longer term perspective, a 5-year window or vision on what they're planning to do. You have 3 chances to apply for career. If you're declined 3 times, you can no longer apply. And of course, once you get tenure, you can no longer apply. This is a highly competitive program. I will say that a lot of universities support and are promoting the idea that many of their early faculty researchers should be submitting a career grant. I would say that it really depends on the project that you want to submit as to whether a career would be appropriate or not. You may have something that's a really nice, tight set of specific aims that really is going to fit nicely into a 3-year window. And you don't necessarily need to consider the career simply because somebody is telling you to do that if a 3-year grant is more appropriate. The other thing to keep in mind about the career mechanism is that there is an educational component. So you want to consider the types of educational activities that you would be integrating with your research program, and you have to talk about those as part of and really in addition to other broader impact activities that you might be discussing. Next slide. I wanted to also mention the doctoral dissertation research improvement grants. There are not that many programs at NSF that provide this DDRIG opportunity. Most of those programs that still have the DDRIG are in SBE. But because there's a range of total direct costs and eligibility rules and so forth that vary across programs, I encourage you to look specifically at the program that you think is most aligned with your research if you were a doctoral student. This is to support or augment your doctoral dissertation project. It's not really intended to support rent or tuition that you would already be paying for as a graduate student. But if there are travel expenses, if there are particular supplies and materials that you may need as part of your project or to make your project better, that's what these grants are intended for. And so they're a lot smaller than perhaps a regular faculty grant would be, but many individuals indicate that these grants really kind of move them to the next step in their doctoral research and help them to be successful in graduate school. Next slide. And finally, I want to talk about research coordination networks. So, and unfortunately, that link is not very clear. But again, you can Google RCN and NSF, and it should pop up as one of the first hits in Google. This is a mechanism to help researchers who are focused on a particular topic or theme and really want some support to be able to get together on a regular basis and talk about that particular research theme, think about gaps, think about ways to move forward, make new connections and networks. This is limited to 5 years and $500,000. And I would also say that this is one where you should probably contact the program officer. It's not required, but it's always a good idea to reach out to the program officer to see whether the idea that you have is, number one, appropriate for a research coordination network, and 2, is something that that particular program is going to be able to consider. Next slide. So now I want to move on to answering questions that we often get about, well, I don't really know where to start. NSF, even though it's not that big of an agency, has a lot of different programs, and it's really kind of overwhelming. So I'm going to assume that if you're listening to this particular recording, that you are potentially interested in programs that fall within SBE, Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. So I want to start there. I want to encourage you to take a look at the SBE programs page, which is shown here. There's a screenshot. You can click on programs and then you'll be able to scroll down through the different divisions, through the multidisciplinary section of SBE, and there is also an indication of cross-cutting programs and cross-directorate programs. Next slide. Once you have clicked on a particular program to look further into whether it might be the right program for you, and I'll just mention here that this is a screenshot from the Developmental Sciences program. There's been a recent revamp of the NSF website so that the individual program pages that you click on may not look exactly like this anymore, but the information that they contain will be the same. And important information that you'll want to take a look for when you click on a program is who is the program director, and that should be listed with their name, email, phone, and it will indicate that they are program director. It will give you information about how you apply to that particular program. So either there will be a solicitation link that is specific to that program, or it may indicate that you're really just supposed to follow the rules laid out in the grants guide, in the NSF grants guide. And then it will also indicate any deadlines or target dates or target windows. And just very quickly, a deadline means that the date that's listed there is when you have to have that proposal turned in at your local time. So it's usually 5 p.m. local time. A target date means that there may be a little bit of wiggle room, and that with permission from the program officers, you may be able to submit with a little bit later than the date that's indicated. And again, that really depends across the foundation. Programs will vary in whether they use deadlines or target dates or target windows, or in some cases, no deadlines at all. Next slide. Now, once you've scrolled beyond that basic information, there should be a synopsis of the program. It's not going to be super long in most cases, but it should give you an idea of the general scope of that program, and you can start to think about whether the research idea that you have is a fit for that program. Once you've read that, if you're still thinking, I really still am not sure whether this is something that would be of interest to that program, I highly encourage you to click on the link at the bottom of each page that says what has been awarded recently. This is a really great way to get an idea for recent awards, to see what the research portfolio for that particular program currently looks like. Next slide. And when you click on that link, it's going to take you to the NSF Awards database, which is a publicly available database, but it will have already filtered so that you're just seeing recent awards from that particular program. Next slide. If you click on a particular title for a particular award, you will then be able to see, again, who the program officer was, when it was awarded, how long the award is for, what was the awarded amount. You can also see whether other programs co-funded that particular award, and then you can read the abstract to get even more details about that particular program. Next slide. All right, so this is a little bit of an aside, but a very important one, which is while you're doing this investigation of different programs on the NSF website, you should also be making sure to read very carefully the solicitation, if there is one, for a particular program, and very importantly, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPG. I believe there's a new one coming out in October, which will be NSF 22-1. This is not exciting reading, but it is important reading. It is really all of the details and rules about NSF, about what proposals can look like, about limitations on pages, margins, all of that nitty-gritty, and also explaining different funding mechanisms and opportunities, some of which we've already gone over. This is always where you should start if you have a question, because it's probably in there. And even if you read it and it doesn't make complete sense to you, it will give you a starting point where you can then follow up with a program officer. A lot of times there are also frequently asked questions for particular programs that can be very useful, because the program officers sit around and think about, or based on emails that they've gotten, they compile a list of common questions. Next slide. All right, so next steps. After you have narrowed down programs that you think may be relevant to your particular research program or question, now is the point, and you've done your homework, you've looked through the PAPG and you've read the solicitation. Now is the point where you can put together a couple of paragraphs, or what we call a one-pager, and email that to relevant programs to ask them whether they think that your project is a fit for their program. And they may get back to you and say, yes, it seems like it's a fit, and they may have some additional input for you or instructions. They may say, no, this isn't really a fit, but I think maybe you should think about this other program. Or they may even have suggestions about other agencies other than NSF if it's not really within the NSF mission of basic and fundamental research. So why is this better than calling up a program officer on the phone? So it's fine to call a program officer on the phone. Many of us are teleworking now, and so we may have our phones going to voicemail and then calling people back. But the main reason is that we are often multitasking, and our brains are in many different places. And so getting a phone call with somebody who really wants to talk about a very specific topic is sometimes difficult for us to kind of shift gears and do our best job at listening. So that's why it's fine to want to have a conversation and to set up a time to have a conversation, but it's always helpful for the program officers if you can send that one pager first, so that we have a chance to really read it and reflect on it and think about how it either does or doesn't fit into our program and so forth. All right, next slide. So one of the things that a lot of first-time submitters may not be aware of is that as a principal investigator, as a PI, it's not really your grant. I mean, it is your grant. You're going to be doing the research. You are the person who's writing up the proposal for the most part. But it's actually your university who is going to be the awardee if you are successful in getting an award from NSF. And for that reason, your sponsored research office, sometimes they're called sponsored programs offices or some other title, but the research office has the responsibility of administering grants once they're awarded to your university. And they also have the responsibility of helping investigators to submit their proposals. So the crux of this slide is that you do need to work with your research office. Depending on the institution that you're at, you may have somebody that's at a department level that helps first and works with the central office. You may work directly with a central office. You may be at a small institution where there are only a couple of people making up your research office. But whatever the case, you do need to coordinate with them. And as the slide says, be nice to them, because they often will have a lot of the answers, that nitty-gritty that's in the PAPG. They will be able to help you with those types of issues, answer questions, guide you on how to put together your budget, instruct you on what the indirect cost or overhead rate should be for the research that you're proposing, and help you get a FASTLane ID. All of these different things they will be able to help you with, and they are ultimately the entity that pushes the button to submit a proposal to NSF. Next slide. All right, and what does a proposal actually look like? Again, you can read about all of these pieces in the PAPG, but briefly here, you have a summary page. You have generally a 15-page description, though that may vary depending on the funding mechanism. You will have a references cited section. You will have a bio sketch section. You will have a budget and a budget justification. You will have to provide a list of collaborators and affiliations so that we can determine what your conflicts of interest are, so that we're not having someone that you have a conflict with, which can mean that you're a collaborator with, reviewing your proposal. So we're trying to make sure that the review process is fair. and avoid those types of conflicts and biases. Next slide. In addition, you need to tell us about current and pending support, meaning other grants that you're applying for that may overlap with the grant to NSF, data management plan, if applicable, a postdoc mentoring plan, and then you also have the opportunity to provide suggestions of people that you think would be appropriate reviewers, or suggestions of people that shouldn't probably review because you believe that they are for some reason biased. I want to just go back one slide, please, and talk a little bit more about that project summary. So that project summary is divided into 3 sections, as it indicates here: an overview, an intellectual merit section, and a broader impacts section. And we're going to talk a little bit more about intellectual merit and broader impacts in a couple of slides. But what I really want to get across here is that this one page, you should imagine this being kind of like a resume for your proposal. This is not something to wait until the last minute and then write after everything else is done. This should be something that you take a lot of time to craft. And your reader, who's going to be a panelist or perhaps an outside external reviewer, your reader should understand pretty much the scope of your project, what it is that you're asking, why you think it's important, the types of data that you're going to be using, the types of analyses that you're going to be using, and what the broader impacts of that research may be. That should all be clear to them from that first summary page, and it should make them want to turn the page and read the project description, that longer description of your research. I've seen a lot of instances, not just of dissertation students, but of faculty, where that summary really does not do a great job. I read it and I'm really still not sure what's going to be happening in the project description. So take care and take time to really craft that in a way that makes sense, and have other people read it and make sure that it makes sense to people who are not, right in the middle of the project the way that you are about your own work. Next slide again. I would also just want to mention here that for data management, this is something that NSF really cares a lot about. And you have to keep in mind, we are a federal agency. We are awarding funds that come from taxpayer dollars. And so we want to be sure that the research that we're supporting is making their outcomes and data sets available to the broader research community and even to the public when allowable. So please make sure to look at the PAPG, the grants guide, at the section about data management, because it outlines all of the different aspects of a data management plan that you should be discussing. Don't blow that off. Don't wait till the last minute. Make sure that you've really thought it through and think really hard about your responsibility to the research community and to the public about making the findings of your project available if your project is awarded. Next slide. All right, this is to show what the submission process looks like. I know that a lot of times people say, well, I put in the proposal and then I didn't hear anything and it seemed like forever. It was probably around 6 months, but it really is kind of a black box where, and this is true for most agencies, there are a lot of idiosyncrasies about the way that each agency works and how the process goes. So this is to just give you a little bit of insight into what that looks like once your proposal comes to NSF. And in fact, before. So there's on the bottom a timeline, and it says 90 days. This means that when there is a new NSF opportunity that is announced to the public, there have to be at least 90 days between when that is announced and when the target or deadline occurs. And this is to make sure that people have time to see that announcement and to respond to that announcement. The research communities are then responding by drafting proposals. And you can submit your proposal. This slide is a little bit dated. It says FASTLane and grants.gov. I wanted to also point out that research.gov is the other way that you can now be submitting proposals to NSF, and that many things are being transitioned over from FASTLane to research.gov. So if you have a chance, and if your research office is willing to consider research.gov, we're encouraging people to look into that. Proposals come into NSF, and then they are routed based on the number of the project, of the program description or the solicitation. They are routed to appropriate programs and program officers. and support staff. We look at those proposals, we make sure that they are compliant with all of the rules and eligibility issues and limitations on page numbers and margins and all of those types of things. If there are issues, if a proposal is not appropriate for NSF, it can be returned without review, but we try very hard to make sure that we are routing a proposal to an appropriate place within NSF before we return something without review. If there are issues that need to be fixed, those can generally be done during this compliance checking portion where it says NSF Program Officer. And then we begin the review process. So we identify a panel of reviewers and/or a number of external reviewers. So an ad hoc reviewer means somebody who is being sent usually one proposal by email, kind of like a manuscript review, and being asked to review that proposal. A panel means that we're actually bringing together a group of experts in a particular research area to review and discuss a group of proposals. Sometimes there's a combination, so that's how it works for biological anthropology, for example. For our senior proposals, our faculty proposals, we have a panel, but we also, for each proposal, get one or more ad hoc reviews from experts on the particular topic of the proposal. And then in some cases, as I mentioned with the rapid and eager mechanisms, we may have internal only review. And that's also true sometimes for workshop and conference proposals if they're under a particular dollar amount. What we're asking those panelists and ad hoc reviewers to do is advise us. They are an advisory group who is advising us about the intellectual merit and broader impacts of each proposal and giving us advice as program officers about whether they believe that they are highly competitive or moderately competitive. Different programs have different scales, but essentially they're dividing them up into things that are competitive and not competitive, and providing a lot of written and oral feedback to us about each proposal and its overall merit. Once we have all of the reviews done and the panels are done, we are then meeting as a program and with our leadership to talk about the proposals that we think we would like to award. We make recommendations. We actually, as program officers, do not make the awards ourselves, but we make recommendations. They go through a number of additional levels of approval and then go to the division director, and if it's being awarded, to the Division of Grants and Agreements. And if you've ever received an award from NSF, the email that you get about the award is coming from the Division of Grants and Agreements. If it is not awarded, then you will get an email that says, we're sorry, it has not been awarded. Here's where you can access your proposal reviews and the panel summary. If there's a panel summary, it will go back to you and to your research office, and then you will have an opportunity to review that input and consider whether you want to submit the proposal again. As the slide says, there are exceptions to the way that the submission procedure goes, but in general, this is the general way that it works, and our goal is to have a turnaround time from the time something is submitted to the time that we've made an award or decline decision, which is at the DD concur stage on this slide. That's 6 months. Next slide. All right, so I mentioned intellectual merit and broader impacts, and I thought when I was putting this together, maybe I should have talked about these up further earlier in the presentation because they're really important, but here they are. And these are the 2 merit review criteria that NSF uses for anything that is externally reviewed, which is most of the things that we receive. It used to be a long time ago that there was not a broader impact criterion, it was just intellectual merit. But it became evident over the years that we really want to understand not only the merit of the project itself in terms of the research design and the investigators and the resources that investigators have, all of the things about a particular project and how it's going to advance knowledge and science in a particular area, that we also really wanted to understand what was the bigger picture, what would be the benefits of a particular research project to society. Maybe that's something about the inherent findings of a project that could benefit society. Maybe it's something about STEM education, science communication to the public, those are the types of activities that are considered in terms of broader impacts. And I want to highlight on this slide a link at the very bottom, which is a new notice from the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate talking about broader impacts and really framing broader impacts with respect to the kinds of research that are done in SBE fields. Next slide. Now, I don't want to belabor this too much, but these are really the important things to be thinking about when you are writing your proposal. And when you read the PAPG, you will actually see that you have to have a section in the project summary called intellectual merit and one called broader impacts. And then within the project description, the 15 pages, you also have to have a section on broader impacts, and the rest is really implied to be about your intellectual merit. But one of the things to do when you are thinking about how to present your project is to think like a reviewer would be thinking. Imagine that you are the reader. You probably already know where the strengths and weaknesses of your project are. And so you're really in a good position to be able to write and present your research in a way that will be persuasive to the reader. So as an applicant, many times what you really want to be conveying is that you have a new idea, or you have something where you feel that it's important to further investigate something that's been investigated before. You want to talk about what the expected results are going to be and whether you have alternative plans in case there are problems, the pitfalls section of your proposal. You want to talk about exactly what you're planning to do and how you're going to, again, think about, is it a high-risk project? Is there a chance of failure? What happens if parts of the project don't work and others do? And then talk about why it's you as an investigator, you and your team, who are the appropriate group to be conducting this particular project. It's also helpful to think about it from the reviewer perspective. And a lot of times, especially on a panel, where a panel is looking at a number of proposals, they're really asking which of these proposals are incremental and which of these proposals are really going to be transformational or moving things forward. It doesn't mean that incremental science is never funded in NSF. It means that if you do have something that's incremental, you need to really make a case for why it's still an important thing to be supported. Another question may be, well, is it actually going to be valuable if we have negative results from this study? Or is it really just a complete waste of time and money if the specific aims don't go the way that the PI has planned? And then, of course, feasibility. And this actually comes into play quite a bit. Can the investigators do this project? Is what they are proposing to do technically feasible? Does it make sense based on what's already known in a particular research field? All of those types of feasibility issues. Do they have permission to access the data and the resources that they need to do the project? Letters of collaboration, permits, all those types of things are useful in showing your case that you are prepared and that you're ready to go with a particular project. Next slide. So for the second merit review criterion of broader impacts, we have a similar comparison between what you may be thinking of as an applicant and what the reviewers may be looking for. Again, broader impacts are the types of activities and impacts that go beyond how you will be advancing the science itself to how the research outcomes may either benefit society or somehow affect society. And that could be through STEM education, it could be through public science communication, it could be through inherent outcomes of the research itself. So you need to be sure that you're providing a clear integrated plan, one where you show that it's feasible, that you're not overstating your broader impacts, but that you've also given it sufficient thought, and that you will know whether your broader impact activities are having an impact or not, which means considering whether there's an evaluative component to your broader impacts plan. Reviewers are often interested in looking at whether those particular broader impact activities are connected to the research. The PAPG will tell you that they don't have to be directly connected to your specific aims, but I've found that it's often the case that a panelist or a reviewer finds it to be a better package when those activities do somehow connect back to the research itself. And again, this is talking about things like science communication and K through 12 outreach and public outreach. They're interested in whether it can actually be executed, whether it's feasible, whether you are targeting the appropriate groups and have the appropriate goals, and again, whether the investigators will be able to demonstrate that those broader impact activities have in fact had an impact. Next slide. All right, a few other tips and discussions about proposal writing. So you know that you have to be focusing on intellectual merit and broader impacts, but what makes a proposal competitive? This is one of the most common questions that we get when we do outreach. I'm going to talk about this in 2 slides. The first slide is what makes a proposal competitive, and the second slide is kind of the opposite, things that you want to avoid. So there will be a little bit of redundancy in these 2 lists, but I think it's important to consider kind of from both perspectives, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. Does your research have the potential for high impact? So you want to make the most persuasive case that your research matters, that people should care about the outcomes of your research, and that it could have broader impacts beyond your particular scientific research community. Are your ideas new and original? Is your research plan focused and feasible? So the research plan really needs to be clear. Don't forget to talk about how you're going to analyze your data. A lot of times people seem like they run out of room talking about the background, talking about the specific aims, and then the sections where they actually talk about how they're going to do their analyses are cut a little bit short. We recognize that there's a page limit and that it's really challenging to fit everything in, which is one of the reasons that we tell people to start much earlier than they think it's going to take them to complete a proposal. Do you have the experience? Are you the people to do the project? Do you have the experience necessary? Or if you don't have it, do you have a group of collaborators who will be augmenting your research team? Have you provided an appropriate background section to make sure that your reader knows what the background, what the existing literature and research is in that area, or if they're an expert in that area, to demonstrate that you know what the background information is in that particular area? Is there a sound scientific rationale? And is it feasible? Again, feasibility really comes into play because we get a lot of really great proposals and really great ideas. And in terms of making distinctions between a bunch of really great proposals, feasibility and thinking about pitfalls and alternative plans can come into play. Next slide. All right, and common pitfalls to avoid. So first, again, going back, read the solicitation, read the sections of the PAPG that are relevant to proposal preparation. Make sure that you talk about the methods and predictions. Make sure that you have a sufficiently developed data analysis plan. So having a vague plan is not a good thing. If you have a disconnect between the framing and motivation in the proposed activities, so sometimes people start out with a really interesting big question at the beginning of a proposal, and then they never really make it clear how the specific aims that they will be focusing on and the analyses that they plan and the expected outcomes of those analyses are really going to connect back to that first big question. So making sure that the framing is appropriate and that all of the different pieces of the proposal connect back to one another. Failing to establish feasibility, we've talked about. And then this is a tough one, not tailoring your proposal to the appropriate audience. So this is where sending that one-pager to a program officer or a group of program officers can be very useful in getting feedback about what is kind of the culture of a particular review panel or a particular program, and making sure that you are writing your proposal in a way that is most appropriate to the audience that will be reading it. Next slide. All right, so I want to start this by saying that many people are declined on their first try to NSF. And while it's never fun to get a decline, it should never be taken as, you are a failure and you should never try to submit a proposal to NSF again. Most people in academia know that, but sometimes we get students where this is their first proposal and they're very demoralized when they get a decline. So a decline isn't the best outcome from a PI perspective, but NSF provides a lot of feedback in terms of the written reviews of the panelists and ad hoc reviewers, in terms of the written comments that are included if there was a panel discussion in the panel summary, and sometimes in addition, comments from the program officer that are included with the panel summary and reviews, and then follow-up conversations that you can have with the program officer if you have additional questions about what happened and how you can improve your proposal. So the first thing it says here, develop a thick skin. I guess more than anything else, I want to say that I am always really, really happy with the way that panels operate and the care with which they review every proposal and the way that they try to give constructive criticism. I know that sometimes PIs still are unhappy with the feedback that they get, but I think it's easy to imagine from the outside that panels are, slashing things with a red pen and, trying to put everything in the not competitive pile. And it's really not like that. They really do take a lot of time and care, and they really take the job seriously. And I have an immense amount of respect for the panelists. So that's a good thing for the research community to know, that the panelists take this seriously. They put in a ton of time, and they really do try to give constructive feedback. Take time to digest the reviews. Wait a little while, please. Don't call us up right after you read something and you're really upset about it. Wait, let it percolate for a little while. Think about the specific questions that you have that you'd like to get feedback on from a program officer. And then think about which of the weaknesses that have been raised are things that you can actually address and the ones that you can't. So much like manuscript review, sometimes there are things that people ask you to do that really just you can't do them, or it's asking for a different project. So it's not that you have to do everything that you that you read in the feedback, but do take time to really consider all of the feedback and which pieces make sense and how you plan to move forward. Next slide. And I think this may be the last slide. I wanted to add there are some common myths that we want to make sure that people don't continue to think are true. The first one says that NSF only funds scholars at elite institutions. That is not the case. We do fund some scholars at elite institutions, but we also have concerted efforts to broaden participation and diversity in science. And that includes making sure that we are reaching out to institutions that may not have as much federal funding or as much NSF funding, making sure that we are trying to reach students in equitable ways so that everybody has access to NSF and understands NSF. And that's partly what these types of outreach events are for. A myth that NSF only funds famous academics. That's also not true. We do have the statistic about Nobel Prize winners, but we also have just a ton of other researchers, thousands and thousands of funded projects that are doing great science. And some of it, as I said, incremental, some of it more paradigm shifting, but it's not just, the same few people getting funded over and over again. A common myth that once you get a decline, you are always declined, as we just mentioned in a previous slide. You have a lot of feedback and you have an opportunity to speak with a program to get a little bit more perspective on the types of things that may have not gone the way that you had hoped and how you can make your proposal better. Keeping in mind that we can never promise that a proposal is going to do better, we can provide general guidance on the types of things that can help you to streamline your ideas and to refine things in a way that could help you have a better proposal. We can never promise they're going to do better because they're reviewed as if they are new each time. And finally, that the advisory committees are the ones making funding decisions. Yeah, so this goes back to the idea that these panelists doing this great work and providing all of this feedback to you and to us about the intellectual merit and broader impacts of your project are advisory. They are putting these proposals into different bins, but it is ultimately the program officers who are taking into consideration not only the feedback from those advisory panels, They're thinking about their program portfolio. They're thinking about things like broadening participation. So there are a lot of additional things that go into those decisions. And it is ultimately the program who makes those award recommendations. So additional resources. So in addition to going to nsf.gov, which is your main source of information for all things NSF, do remember that you can reach out to program officers. Part of our job is to connect with investigators, either people who already have funding or people who are interested in learning more about NSF and about getting funded. Please reach out to us if you have questions. Do your homework first, but please reach out to us. Sponsored research offices. Again, these are individuals that you will have to work with to submit a proposal to NSF, and we encourage you to connect with them early and often. You can also reach out to people at your own institution and other institutions who are funded researchers, people who have experience as NSF awardees and or people who have been on review panels. And you can also reach out to your peers and ask other people to be reading your proposals and providing feedback both from an expert viewpoint and perhaps from a scientific layperson viewpoint. I think that's the end of my slides. And I want to thank everybody in the audience, and I look forward to speaking with people and answering questions during the live segment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Rebecca. And since you are looking forward to this question answering session, we'll jump right into it. Thank you everyone for submitting these questions. We've been firing away with some of the answers, and keep them coming as we continue along. So we'll get started with the first one. Rebecca, can you tell us, how does SBE compare to other directorates in funding career grants?
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. And thanks for the question. I don't have specific numbers at hand right now, but I would encourage you actually to take a look at a brand new resource called NSF, sorry, my phone's ringing, NSF by the Numbers, which is a visual interactive system for looking at data on different projects. And I'm not sure whether that can filter down to career or not, but I believe you can filter down based on directorate and be able to look at those awards that have career in the title, if nothing else. The other thing I will say is that just in general, SBE, I believe, is one of the smaller directorates at NSF in terms of overall awards and also in terms of funding. And so that also should be taken into consideration when you're comparing across the different directorates.
Thank you for that. We have another one. Can you tell us, what are the opportunities for international cooperation? Is financial support possible for international cooperation, and what are the conditions?
Yeah, so a lot of that is actually laid out in the PAPG, but I'll try to do a brief summary here because I know we also have a limited amount of time. In general, NSF is encouraging US researchers to be collaborating with other researchers in other nations and other parts of the world. And when possible, the framework is that NSF supports the US side of those collaborations, and other institutions in those other nations support the other collaborators. And that's sometimes possible, but not always possible. So there are situations where there may be some sort of sub-award that may really have a unique resource or set of experts or some other reason that they're really needed as part of a project. And so the PAPG gives guidance on making sure that you justify in a proposal that's asking for funding for an international sub-awardee or a consultant, that you make sure that you justify why it's a unique resource and why it isn't something that could be done by someone at a US institution. So it's really trying to find that balance between remembering that NSF is a US taxpayer-funded federal agency of the US, but also that NSF does want to support international collaborations.
Thank you, Rebecca. Here's another one. I have a project that fits best in the cultural anthropology program, but I'm not technically an anthropologist, though I've had training. Can I apply?
Yeah, so I mean, the general answer is yes, I can speak for my program, biological anthropology. I'm interested in assessing the project in terms of whether the research that's going to be done in that project is within scope for my program. I will say that when there's an individual who maybe is coming from a different field, that sometimes it's more challenging for that person to engage with the literature or the background and theory in that field if they're not coming from that field. And there's a couple, ways that can be addressed. One is just to really engage further in that literature and make sure that you're up to date on what's going on in that field, if you are kind of an outsider. And another may be to collaborate with another PI who is somebody who's more familiar with that, or at least have people who can read your proposal and comment on the framing and how it's engaging with that particular field.
Okay. Can we contact the program officer if we're not sure which program to choose, especially if we're doing interdisciplinary research?
Yes, absolutely. And that goes back to what I talked about in the recorded segment about the one-pager and putting together a brief summary of your research and sending it to programs that you think may be relevant to that topic. Absolutely.
Yes. And let's see, how much does type of institution matter? I'm with a new small nonprofit that has a research side and a consulting side. Would I still be eligible for a grant? I was previously an associate professor at a research university.
Yeah, and I put that one to live just because I think it's complicated and it depends on the particular research opportunities. So, for example, there are some solicitations that will be limited to certain types of applicants, and there are others that are more, open to different types of organizations. So you just really have to check and make sure that whatever solicitation or program that you're applying to indicates that your type of institution is eligible, and also making sure that your institution has set up what they need to do on their end to be eligible to be a grantee. That's again something that you can definitely ask a particular program about if you have questions.
Okay, and I'll add, this is one quick one.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for a great session. I have to give the little plug that was on there. And can we submit a proposal regardless of a specific solicitation? Can they submit an unsolicited proposal, basically?
Yes. So many programs, what I kind of call the core programs, but many programs at NSF, the majority of what they receive are unsolicited proposals, meaning that they have a program description. They may have a solicitation, but that it's all investigator driven, and really the only thing that's limiting investigators is if there's a particular deadline or time limit on submissions.
Okay, here's one. To what extent are these impacts of diversity and inclusion, as well as the impact on student training, looked into by the committee? I feel I've spent much time on it in my grant to then get comments only about intellectual merit and nothing else. So I believe they're asking about the broader impacts.
Yeah, and that's a really great question, and it is something that we as program officers, may have noticed as well, that when you get a panel summary with a summary of the discussion that the panel had, that sometimes that broader impact section, the feedback that you get may be shorter than some of the particular things that are being commented on for intellectual merit. But that said, I believe that programs at NSF really are taking both of those review criteria seriously. And, any panel I've ever witnessed, which is more than just biological anthropology, there's always a pretty serious discussion for each proposal about the extent of that broader impact section. And when it's not sufficient, the panel will definitely comment on that. So it may be the case that if you had a really good broader impact section, the reason that the answer is short is because there wasn't a lot of criticism about the section.
Okay. And it has always been very challenging to find the right funding program for interdisciplinary proposals on unconventional topics. So are there any tips on how to increase the chance for such proposals to land in the right program?
Yeah, again, I mean, I hate to go back and repeat myself, but I think putting together a thoughtful summary, a short summary of your project idea, and reaching out to whatever programs that you think, based on your perusal of what they funded, may be appropriate, is the best way to start. I know there was another question too about how interdisciplinary projects get reviewed and whether there are interdisciplinary panels. And I can't really speak for all parts of NSF or maybe even all parts of SBE, but the way that we usually do that is through co-review. And so we may have proposals that end up being reviewed on more than one panel. And as program officers, part of our job is to take that feedback on co-review, you know, thoughtfully, in the sense that some of the comments may be more about, well, this is different from what we are normally seeing on a panel, and some of the comments are really substantive things that we need to know about in terms of the merit, the intellectual merit, or broader impact. So we don't have, I don't know about interdisciplinary review panels for proposals that are coming into core programs, but we do try to address that through the co-review process.
Yes. Okay, and since we are talking about reviewing, there is one where someone wants to know if you can cover a little more on the selection of reviewers.
Yeah, I saw that too, and that's a great question. So so I can talk about two things. One is if we're getting ad hoc reviewers, so where you're sending a specific proposal to one person who is, a knowledgeable or an expert on that particular topic. We're using a lot of different resources. We're using our own knowledge of the field. We're using the references cited in the proposal. We're looking at the suggested reviewers list if it exists for that proposal. We also have access through our library to a lot of the, Web of Science, Scopus. Of course, we have Google Scholar. So all of those different resources. I look at other things sometimes, like recent professional society meetings. So there are lots of different resources that we use to find people who we think are going to be some of the best people to look at a particular proposal. In terms of panelists, and this again is going to depend on each program and how broad or narrow the scope of the program as a whole is. So like for biological anthropology, our the breadth of methods and topics is very, very broad, but we're trying to find panelists who are fairly broadly trained and who are going to be able to cover a particular swath of proposals, not as an expert on every single proposal that they review, but as someone who can have a broad discussion about that proposal in the context of the pool of proposals that are being reviewed on that panel. We also are making concerted efforts to identify a broader pool of potential reviewers, both for the ad hoc and panelist review process. So I'm always looking for new junior individuals who maybe have just recently gotten their PhD or they're coming out of a postdoc. I'm looking at different institutions. So we're looking for broadening diversity and participation on all of the different components that you can think of. So gender, race, geography, type of institution, all of those different kinds of things. We're making an effort to broaden our pool.
And speaking of that, we do have a push, NSFY. There's always a push to increase the number of reviewers. So we typically reach out to the community. So in a session like this, we encourage you to reach out to NSF, reach out to the program officers in your area of expertise, just to make it known that you're interested in becoming a reviewer. So do you want to talk about how important that is for people to become reviewers, prior to submitting a proposal at times even?
Well, what I will say about that is I absolutely agree. I don't think people are just saying this to me. I hope not. The people that serve on a panel and the people who do ad hoc reviews usually say it is of great benefit to themselves as a proposal writer. So that, especially being on a panel, they learn so much about the process and they hear these discussions about what panelists are looking for, that it is very valuable when they go to write their own proposals, and specifically NSF proposals and the idiosyncrasies of the NSF system. Yeah, I agree. I think that's important. And the other thing is, we're not supposed to be like putting together huge lists of people. We really want to hear from the research community when you want to be a reviewer. So we can send out kind of general things. We can talk about it in this kind of panel and say, hey, we really want to hear from you if you're interested in being a reviewer. That's really the best way for us to expand the pool of reviewers, is by hearing it directly from those who are interested.
Yes. Thank you. And I'm from the policy office, so I will say I remember earlier in your the recorded part, you commented that the PAP guide was not exciting reading. I think it's pretty exciting. So I just want to make sure you put that out there. I think
sorry. I'm sorry. No, it's very useful.
No.
Can we agree on useful?
Yes, I just had to throw that in there. Yes, but no. So that is everything Rebecca just explained to you all about becoming a reviewer, reviewing the PAP guide as well, reaching out to the program officers, reaching out to the policy office if you have general questions as well. That is all very necessary and will be helpful to you. So we have now come to the end of our session. So I want to thank you, Rebecca, for joining us today and all of your helpful information. And to everyone, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.